Welcome to episode 23 of Two Cents Tuesday. I've been meaning for some time to speak about the strange love affair that we seem to have in St. Lucia for generating reports in the public service that we seldom or never use. Last week, a former colleague called me to get my input on yet another report that was being developed, and I decided that no, I really must address this topic. I've been lucky to have served in the public service at many different levels. I entered as a junior clerk when I finished secondary school, actually when I finished the St. Lucia A-level college. When I returned to St. Lucia after having completed my PhD, I worked in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries in a middle management position. I left to do consulting, but would later return as a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, and then as the cabinet secretary and head of the public service. That was followed by a stint in the regional public service as a director at the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, or OECS. My public service arc then continued as the Minister with responsibility for the public service, information, broadcasting, sustainable development, energy, science, and technology. So I've seen government work from almost every conceivable angle. What has been consistent for me in all these stints is the large number of reports and studies that I've seen undertaken, written, reviewed, and submitted to government agencies, and how little is done with these documents after they have been received by the respective government agency. Sometimes the documents are even laid before the Cabinet of Ministers with a memorandum to Cabinet seeking Cabinet's endorsement and recommending a series of follow-up actions by the respective ministry or by government on the whole. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the banana industry. I distinctly remember, almost like it was yesterday, being asked by Sir Julian Hunt in 1995, when he was then political leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party, to facilitate and address a whole-day meeting of banana farmers in Richford, Denny, which was being held by the St. Lucia Labour Party to explain the findings of the Cargill report on the banana industry in the Windward Islands, in Creole, by the way. I had to do the whole thing in Creole. That report and many subsequent reports on the banana industry over the course of almost 2 decades, some of them commissioned by the European Union, others by the governments of the banana exporting countries in the Windward Islands, detail the steps that should be taken to reduce cost of production, eliminate wastage, streamline administrative and other processes, increase the productivity of the banana farms, improve the consistency and quality of the bananas, and make the industry generally more profitable for the farmers. After a while, those of us who were familiar with the processes started to remark that the banana industry in St. Lucia and the Windward Islands was being studied to death, literally and figuratively. Unfortunately, that is precisely what eventually happened, with few of the recommended actions being undertaken. There are several other examples that I can point to. We have seen development plans, quadrant plans, redevelopment plans, investment plans, strategies, policies, studies, you name it, and I can guarantee that a report has been commissioned and already presented on the subject. Even more so, when governments change, they commission a whole new set of reports. If you were to read the reports, you would find that most of them make sense and contain sound, practicable recommendations that, if implemented, would have taken us a long way towards addressing our problems. However, our interest in these reports appears to die after the report has been presented. Not only do we often ignore the findings and consign the report to a permanent place on a shelf, among other reports that have been similarly ignored, but sometimes we do the opposite of what the report recommended. I can distinctly remember a diagnostic study of the livestock sector in St. Lucia that was commissioned while I was the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries in the late 1990s to early 2000s. That study was undertaken by a renowned livestock expert from the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO. And in addition to giving us an accurate overview of the livestock sector in St. Lucia and the prospects for its expansion and development, The report strongly recommended against the construction of a large-scale abattoir or meat processing facility because we simply did not have the production to support such a large-scale investment. What it recommended instead, if my memory serves me well, was a construction of a smaller modular plant that could be scaled up as demand and production grew, together with the training of our existing local butchers so that they could produce some of the choice cuts that the hotels and other places required, but also so that they would not be disenfranchised by a large modern abattoir, but they could also be made to adopt better hygiene and sanitary practices, which would make their product healthier and more wholesome. Unfortunately, political hubris trumped common sense, and we went on to do the opposite of what was recommended by that diagnostic study. We routinely collect data from censuses and surveys that we seldom use to inform policy or better direct decision making. It is as if we commissioned the report only because we must check off some box to satisfy a requirement of a funding agency. We have done this in every conceivable sector: crime, health, education, you name it, we've done it. Perhaps the most glaring and unfortunate neglect of the recommendations of a report, and in this case, a report to which thousands of St. Lucians at home and in the diaspora contributed, is our treatment of the report on the recommendations of the Constitution Reform Commission. If we can treat that document with such scant regard, I guess we really should not be surprised about the indifferent treatment that generally all the other reports, studies, strategies, and plans undertaken over the past 3 decades have received. So I would like to recommend something that certainly worked for me as a permanent secretary and as a minister, that every minister, every permanent secretary, and every chief technical officer in every ministry should acquaint him or herself with the findings of the reports that have been done for their ministry over the last 15 years before they commission another report that will cost the government or some development partner a sizable sum of money and will involve a significant expenditure of time and effort, only to spend the rest of its life sitting after completion on a seldom visited shelf in the government office or occupying a few megabytes of space on a never used jump drive. Trust me, reading your reports helps because not only does it give you an overview of the ministry that you now have responsibility for, but it allows for continuity instead of the stop-start model that we seem to delight in with the way in which we run government. Thank you for viewing another 2 Cents Tuesday. Have a good week and see you next week. Goodbye.